Hello, wonderful listeners, and welcome to another exciting episode of Coffee with Convery. Take a moment to brew yourself a cup of your favorite coffee or hot drink, find your comfy spot, and get ready for a caffeine-fueled journey into a captivating conversation with our truly remarkable guest today, Stephen Shedletzky, aka Shed. Shed is not just any leader. He's a dedicated visionary who's absolutely passionate about helping others discover their strengths and unlock their full potential. With an unwavering belief in the transformation power of leadership to inspire positive change, he has made it to life's mission to guide and empower those leaders who put their people and purpose at the forefront of the endeavors. Based in Toronto, Canada, Stephen founded Shed Inspires in July 2021, where he serves as a founder, a speaker, a coach, and an author. Over the past 2 years, he's been instrumental in assisting leaders in listening to and nurturing the voices of their teams. He understands that creating an environment where individuals feel safe, encouraged, and valued for their input is crucial for teams' cohesion as well as their success. Shed's dedication to promoting a culture of open communication and collaboration extends to his writing. His book, Speak Up Culture, when leaders truly listen, people step up, just released in October 2023. This thought leadership piece sheds light, no pun intended, on the importance of genuine listening in leadership and its transformational impact on individuals and organizations. Before founding Shed Inspires, Shed spent 12 years with Simon Sinek Inc., where he played various pivotal roles. He started as the fourth member of the team in 2011. He co-hosted the Start With Why podcast. And over the years, he's assumed leadership positions such as Chief of Staff, Lead Igniter, and Head of Brand Experience, Training, and Development. Additionally, he's conducted numerous keynotes, workshops, and team and leadership development program. Incredible accomplishments, Shed. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, I'm no NASCAR driver, but thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Brian. It's great to be with you again.
It's awesome. Awesome. I can't wait to get going. So I have a few rapid fire questions and then
Yeah.
we'll jump right in. So what are your pronouns?
He, him are my pronouns.
Okay. And superpower. What's your superpower?
I think my superpower is finding words that match thoughts, emotions, and feelings, and creating a safe space where people feel that it's safe and worth it to speak up.
So important and so important today as we were getting started here. Okay, the next one is an interesting one. I always love this one, but do you have a favorite smell?
Oh, the first two ones that come to mind, one is like a nice flower, like
Yep.
a bouquet of flowers, certain sort of sweetie. And then the other is, walking into either my home now or my parents' home and like that smell of fresh cooked meal.
Absolutely. Can't beat that either. What is the best compliment you've ever received?
Huh. Um, you make me feel heard.
Love that. That is awesome. Okay, guilty pleasure snacks. We all have them. What is your go-to snack?
This one doesn't make me too guilty. I love
Okay.
cashews.
Oh,
Cashews are my favorite nut, but everything in moderation.
okay. Cashews. Awesome. Favorite subject in school?
Leadership and public speaking.
Okay. We all start somewhere, wherever that may be when it comes to a first job. What was your very first job?
My first was an internship at Knightsbridge Leadership Solutions, and that was an internship. My first job out of university, well, I'm lying. My first job was a ski instructor at Camp White Pine. I taught water skiing and barefooting and wakeboarding.
Oh,
Um, then an internship at Knightsbridge, and then my first job at a school was with Petro Canada turned Suncor in their leadership development program.
very cool. Very cool. Look at all those transferable skills from water skiing right to the office.
I love that. Yeah, keep your hips up.
That's right. If you had to describe yourself in one word, what would it be?
Aw. um, engaging.
Engaging. Yeah, I would say that's absolutely true. Okay,
Thank you.
so while I spoke a bit about you at the beginning of the podcast, I'm wondering for our audience if you could share a bit more about your overall journey. What inspired you to become so passionate about helping others discover their strengths and fulfill their potentials?
I mean, it's my why. Like I
Yeah.
love that. I had a professor. I went to the Ivy School of Business at Western University, and I had this amazing professor who I'm still in touch with today, a Kiwi by the name of Dr. Dennis Shackle, and he taught a number of those favorite courses and subjects that I mentioned. He was a professor on leadership and organizational behavior, and public speaking. So um, he facilitated an experience in the classroom that
Mhm.
had me experience what fulfillment felt and looked like. And the way I define fulfillment is using our strengths, of which we all have strengths, whether we know it or not. Oftentimes we can be blind to our own strengths because we can't read the label on the jar when we're stuck inside the jar ourselves. And so we all have strengths. And the opportunity, I think, in our lives and careers is to discover those strengths and then use them to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. That's when we feel fulfilled. Um, so I graduated out of biz school, started in my career. My first day of my first job, 1,000 people were let go post merger.
Okay.
And so I was the kid walking in as many more were walking out, boxes in hand. And so I saw firsthand, Brian, the impact of uncertainty and tumultuous time and culture, and quite frankly, leaders not necessarily being as transparent as perhaps they could be. And my experience of a good number of very senior leaders showing up for self-preservation rather than service. And there were only sort of a few leaders that I saw in that transition of that merger who really impressed me. One was my direct manager who was set to retire in a few months. And so like a second term president, he had nothing to lose. He sort of laid it all on the line for his people because the only thing he had left was his legacy and his pride. And it was amazing to see him fight for his people. But I had a front row seat
Mhm.
as someone who was weeks, months into their career. The person across from me in the cubicle was a 37-year veteran of the company, and she was scared out of her, insert profanity here,
Sure.
about her future. And so I began to become fascinated with culture, leadership, and then the positive and negative impact on how leaders show up and behave, psychological safety, and how all of the emotional culture and leadership side of business either makes things better, not only for employee productivity, but also employee health and well-being. So that was sort of the entrance
Wow.
into me being like, I think this is what I want to do for my career. Quite frankly, because my first experience out of university was awful.
Yep.
I lost motivation for my work. I made myself wrong. Why am I not motivated? What's wrong with me? Comparing myself to others. I often use the analogy that when you're in school, it's like climbing up a staircase. It's like, okay, I'm on level 14 now. I need to do these things to get to level 15. Here's the rubric of how I have to behave and what I have to do to get certain grade. And then when you enter into career, I feel like it's more this spiraling parking garage, and you're like in a Seinfeld episode wondering like P4, I was just on P7 a second ago. Like where am I? So yeah, so that's sort of the foundation of what got me interested in my passions, which is through my own sort of experience, as well as some of my early career struggles, quite frankly.
It's so fascinating because having that exposure at such a early stage in your career and seeing that, it's interesting how that hit you, and how you've made it your mission to kind of look at it from a different lens. And um, you know, it's often that a lot of people today, even today, I've had this conversation where there is downsizing, people get let go, things change. You decide it's not the right for fit for you, whatever the case may be. But there's
Mhm.
also some bit of shaming still around sort of those moments where it can also open a door to something else that's fantastic, right? But it's at the moment, it's like the world is coming to an end.
Totally.
And it feels really awful going through that. But it's interesting how you had that experience. Thanks for sharing that. It really is
Yeah,
interesting.
my pleasure. And I mean, I even in the moment had feelings. I certainly have feelings of gratitude looking back,
Yeah.
but even in the moment, I had, though it was a, turmoil and challenging, I had gratitude that I wasn't the person in the cubicle next to me. I wasn't 37 years down this path. I was weeks, months down this
Yeah.
path, and I felt grateful that it was my first career experience. And oftentimes people ask me, what got you interested in this work, and my response is pain.
Yeah. For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. It
Some
does.
yeah. Sometimes we have to experience the very opposite of what it is that we love to really get clear on what it is that we love, which is why I'm a fan of just, you know, especially as like coming out of like as a younger person looking for their first job or first roles. Like there's no such thing, I believe, as a dream job,
Yeah.
because life changes, circumstances change, you grow, you change, your life changes based on what's going on with you and your family and the world around you. Same with that of an organization. So I believe more in an ideal career path rather than any one dream job. And especially when you're younger, my advice for anyone who wants it is just make the next best right choice. Like take pressure off. You're like, will I grow? Will I learn? And it's like a life is a series of lily pads, and hopefully you keep jumping to the next one that has you experience something that makes you better and helps you grow.
I love that. It's such a great insights and lessons for our listeners here too today. Thank you for sharing that. Shed Inspires, it's your brainchild. Could you tell us more about the mission and goals of how it inspires and hope and how you hope to achieve them?
Yeah, so I spent, as you shared, more than a decade on Simon Sinek's team, and I was the fourth person to join his team, and the team has since grown, at least 5x of that. And I was a big part of that growth from 4 people to 15 to 20, 25. And the thing that was I always made sure it was on my job description, and always something that I was so passionate about, was a culture piece. That, Simon has a very inspiring big message around a more inspired, safe, and fulfilled world. And it was always my view, as he really eloquently puts forth in his first book, Start With Why, that organizations, if they want to deliver upon something to external constituents, whether that's clients, customers, whatever stakeholder, you have to live it from the inside out. And so I was always passionate that my first and foremost role was that. And so as I came across the idea for my first book, Speak Up Culture, and as it became clear of like, hey, I should set up my own company and do my own keynotes and workshops and digital products and all these things, first and foremost, our number one remit is to ensure that we practice what we preach, that we have a team and we have an organization in which people feel that it's safe and worth it to speak up and to contribute, to have a team where folks can show up and use their strengths to contribute to something bigger than themselves, to feel deeply connected and feel fulfilled by the work that they do. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's worthwhile. So first and foremost, it's to live and preach our message from the inside out. I have a small team, handful of us, but that's the number one goal, because as soon as we stop doing that, there's no efficacy or there's no authenticity to the work, right? So we have to live it from the inside out. And yeah, I mean, really, the main goals is to help contribute toward a future when, in 10, 15, 20 years. Now, I mean, I used to say 20, but it's now probably closer to 15. When my kids, I have 2 young children, almost 8 and 5, when they go and get their first job, I want them to work with a leader and not for a driver. I want
Hmm.
them to join an organization and join a team that makes them a better human being and has them develop, nurture their strengths, and has them contribute to something bigger and more important than profit. So I'm doing this so that when my kids get a job, it's the norm that that work is something that is service oriented for a cause, that helps them grow, that utilizes their strengths, that enables them to step into and become a leader in their own right as well.
Thank you for that. That's so meaningful on so many levels. And I think as we start to talk about the next question I was going to ask you, and there's a lot of buzz right now on LinkedIn and a lot of thought leadership around the difference between a boss and a manager and a leader. And I participated in a couple different events about that recently. And we throw leader around sometimes with not really thinking through what that truly represents. But what in your mind is the key attributes of a leader, and especially in prioritizing the people and their purpose?
Oh, love that. I mean, you just shared some terms, boss, manager, leader. I mean, one of the first things is there in the zeitgeist on LinkedIn and in the professional zeitgeist, there's sort of a tarnishing of the word manager, like manager bad, leader good. And I'm like, well, really? Like, how many people do you know have the title manager or have been a manager in their career? I have. Like, why should we tarnish a role that a good chunk of people, the vast majority of people at one point in their career have held?
That's right.
Being a manager isn't bad. And in fact, change lives and dies at that level. No matter how brilliant a strategy is, you depend upon that middle that has multi-directional influences up, influences side to side to peers, and definitely influences down. It's an enviable role. Now, not all managers are created equal. Management typically is about things. Leadership typically is about people. What we need is more managers who also behave as a leader does. Now, leadership isn't a title. Leadership isn't a position, it's a disposition. So when speaking about the attributes of leadership, I'll lean into the work of my friend Rich Davini, who wrote The Attributes, and he has a chapter in his book, it's actually right here, on leadership attributes. He describes them, and I'll add in a couple more, but he describes the leadership attributes as empathy, authenticity, service orientation. He might call it sacrifice or something, but I call it service orientation, decisiveness, and accountability. I'll also throw in courage, humility. I think the most underrated attribute of a leader is humility. You can be humble and confident at the same time. You cannot be humble and arrogant at the same time. Confidence is a belief that you're good. Arrogance is a belief that you're better than others, right? We
Mhm.
should be confident in our strengths and be humble enough to know that we aren't perfect. We can always get better. And the people around us have strengths and have better ideas and better domain expertise than we ever will because we're human, and we depend upon a tribe. We depend upon a team to be remarkable. As individuals, as a team, wow, look out, right? Um, so yeah, that's how Rich would describe the attributes of leadership: empathy, compassion, authenticity, which means that you say and do the things that you actually believe. You do not need to be warm or charismatic to be a leader. Those aren't requisites. Some of the best leaders I've had in my career, Brian, in my life, have been cold and grumpy consistently. But I never had a doubt in my heart and mind that they cared about me as a human being, right?
Yeah.
Service orientation, the fact that we have the term servant leadership means that our current definition of leadership is broken. Leaders serve, baseline. Decisiveness means that you make a call even if you don't have all the information, and it's timely, right? And then accountability. When the decision goes well, you give credit to others. When the decision doesn't go well, you take disproportionate responsibility. That's what it means to behave as a leader. And just I make the distinction between uppercase L leader and lowercase L leader. An uppercase L leader is you have the title, and we expect you, ergo, to behave as a leader does. Now, if you have the title but not the behavior, you're a boss hole, right?
Yeah.
That's leader, SHIT.
Yeah.
And that trickles down. Similarly, effective leadership trickles down too. But lowercase L leadership is you may not have the title, but you commit to behave as one. And we all know and have come across people who may not be the most senior leader or may not have leadership in their title whatsoever, but every single day they show up to lead and to serve others while having boundaries and agenda and self-care and whatever it means for themselves as well. So as you can tell, I have a lot to say on that topic.
No,
Um,
it's amazing, and I think it's really super insightful. No, no, keep going. It's fine.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I would say. Leadership is a behavior, and when folks behave as a leader, people follow them, meaning you are a leader, and it's earned every single day.
Absolutely. And I was listening to the different words you used to describe, and the decisive one actually calls out to me too, because um, as you talked about, and I've seen this in my own career, is like life is about learning and about new opportunities, and sometimes you got to go with the 80% solution or even less and try it, right? But I have worked with leaders or seen leaders that are afraid to make that commitment in front of their teams and it fail. But decisiveness is such a key attribute of a leader and also shows your, ability to take some risk, but also to let others know that it's okay to fail. I don't know
Yeah,
your
and
thoughts on that, but yeah.
I mean, in it, so much of leadership is contextual as well.
Hmm.
So decisiveness could also be, I'm going to make the call not to lead right now because there's somebody else on the team who's better set to
Love
lead,
that.
and I actually subordinate, I defer, I alpha swap to them.
Yeah.
That's decisiveness. Now you are still accountable because you're still the leader. And when it's time for you to step back in, or it's time for you to then subordinate and say, hey, now let's let this person lead, because based on what the situation needs, it's now this person. So leadership does not mean that you're always in front. There's leading from the front when it's appropriate. There's leading from the side with and there's also leading from the back when it's time to prop somebody else up, because based on proximity, based on skills and attributes and the context of what the situation calls for, you decide to step back. That's still a leadership behavior.
Absolutely. So I know as we're getting started, I congratulated you, but publicly here, congratulations on the release of your book, Speak Up Culture.
Thank you.
It's awesome. And I'm going to kind of change this question up a little bit now that we've talked about it a bit is, you know, I know obviously your passions and things come through even on this podcast. So I think those are what inspired you to write the book. But also, how did it feel to sit down to write your first book and thinking about that from even the audience listening and if they wanted to start to write their own book or do something along those ways and be creative, like how do you overcome barriers to kind of think through, like, I got something to say here and I'm going
Mm.
to write it down. I'm just curious.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, one, I do want to say out loud that the inspiration from the book, um, one of my favorite quotes right now is from a Danish theologian named Kierkegaard, who said, "Life makes sense looking backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Which I just think is so profound and good. Of like,
Yeah.
where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, I don't know. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's like, come on. But looking back, it's very clear why I wrote this book.
And
One, I
such a
grew up
bad
with it.
recruitment. Sorry, I have to interject. Such a bad recruitment question
Oh
coming
my
from the
God, yeah.
recruitment field because who knows what 5 years is going to bring. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the best thing to do is like, well, can you answer first,
Yeah.
interviewer? Yeah, I'll judge you on your answer. Um, I do think it's still an opportunity if you are, because you will be asked this question, to answer with your values and what
Yeah.
matters to you, and to say, I don't know for certain, but these are some things that matter to me, so I want to see if I can help, advance these goals or objectives. Um, so looking back, it makes a lot of sense why I wrote this book. One, I'm a big believer, Brian, that oftentimes our strengths and purpose live on the other side of what we've struggled with or overcome. And so I grew up with a stutter. I still have a stutter. I still have a speech impediment. I've learned to work with it. It still rears its head every now and then. I married a speech language pathologist, a speech therapist. Good choice, not just for me, but also for my kids and nieces and nephews. But I know intimately what it feels like to be voiceless. To have something to say, but to choose not to say it, or to mess up, or to physiologically not do it. I know what that fear of speaking up and fear of speaking feels like intimately. And you don't need to have a speech impediment to have that fear. That is a universal human fear. The other is I've been parts of teams in my 15 plus year career where there is a speak up culture, where it is safe and worth it to speak up and share ideas and share freely with respect and tact and emotional intelligence and situational awareness. Um, but I've been parts of those teams, and it's remarkable. The depth and breadth of the relationships on those teams. I have best friends from those teams still to this day, even though we're no longer formally on the same team. I've also seen teams, whether teams I've been a part of or clients, that don't have a speak up culture, or it's shifted from having one to not having one, and how destructive and toxic, and how it's bad for the firm and bad for the results and bad for creativity and collaboration and innovation, not to mention the health and well-being of the people who show up and work there, whether it's virtually, physically, or some mix in between.
Mm.
So that was the impetus. The question on the process of writing, it was interesting because so the reason I came up with the idea for the book is in 2021, so thick dab in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, I, like many others, I was open to some new stuff, sort of just the recipe of what was happening in my life and career. I was ready to explore. And so I made a conscious effort in the beginning of 2021, like a New Year's resolution, to just like say yes to some more stuff that came my way. Working with Simon Sinek and, having a brand and being known for my work already, mostly on LinkedIn, every now and then friends or friends of friends or acquaintances or even strangers would reach out and say, hey, can you come speak at this event or that event? And because of the pandemic, it was so much easier to do so and show up virtually than it was to hop on a plane and do it. And so I had one person who knew of my work through the team at Simon say, hey, I'm running a Society of Human Resources event in my chapter in St. Louis. I think it was around March or April when he reached out. The event was in October, and he said, would you come and speak? And I said, like, sure. We can do it through me, or we can do it through Simon's team. If it's through Simon's team, this is the price. And he said, well, that's my entire budget for all my speakers, so let's not do that. And I went, okay. And so I hopped on a call with him, and I said, hey, like, I can do it. I might ask my friend Rich Davini, we can do it together, which was really code for I hope Rich is available so I can just do it with him, because then I don't have to come up with my own content. And so I hung up from that call. I sent Rich a message being like, hey, are you free on October, whatever it was? And he's like, no, I'm going to be in Oklahoma giving a keynote live. And I went, uh-oh, what have I done? And so I just sort of let it simmer and thought that, yeah, like, I'll talk about psychological safety and this, that, and the other. And in June or July of 2021, I got the email from the event organizers saying, hello, Stephen, we're so looking forward to your keynote. Please click this link and fill out your talk title and description. And I went, oh, geez, sort of had a panic moment. But it was that sort of positive pressure cooker of I'm a lot more productive when I respond to a specific scenario or context. So if a client's like, hey, come give a talk on no particular date and to no particular audience, I'd be like, I don't know. But if it's like a talk, 3 months, this is what's going on with the team, bring it. I could be like, okay, got you. And so it was that positive pressure cooker that as soon as I got that email, I sort of thought about it, got the kids to bed. I think my wife went up and went to bed early, and I like had it. And I put down some ideas for a talk. At first, I called it Listen Down, Leaders Listen Down, which leaders do, but I think speak up culture is far more positive, less hierarchical and sort of patriotic or patriarchal. And so we called it Speak Up Culture. But it was once I started preparing for that talk, I'm like, I sort of said to my wife very recently after that, I said, I think I'm going to write a book. To which she's like, I would advise against that, knowing your productivity style. But then I started taking notes, and I had about 29 pages of notes. I got introduced to my publisher, page 2, and I wasn't sure if it was a long article or a book. But then I assembled the right team, had an amazing developmental editor. We took that 29 pages of notes and put it into a book outline. It took us about 12 weeks, inclusive of some holiday time over the Christmas holiday season. That would have been 2020. Was that? When was that? That would have been, 2021 into 2022. And that was such a gratifying experience of like, wow, like chapters. And like, I think I have something to say, and there's a book here, and then I got help on the first draft of the book because a blank page totally intimidates me. So I worked with 2 research partners and a writing partner to get the first draft out. And then I heavily edited. So The first draft of the book was 33,000 words. The first manuscript I submitted to the publisher was, I think, 46,000 words. So I wrote another, 13,000 words or so. But yeah, so it was, I think I have an idea, working with someone to actually develop it out. Yes, there's a book here. I do have something to say, and more than an article. And then stacking the deck in my favor that we should all do to figure out what are our productivity styles, our working styles, our strengths, our limitations, and how when doing any big project. I think one of the myths about writing a book, since your one name is on the cover, means that it was just you who did it. Absolutely not. There's a project manager and a designer for the outside and inside. There's sales, marketing, distribution. There's tons of editors. There's a developmental editor, a copy editor, a proofreader. There's research support. So I really stack the deck in my favor to have a world-class, amazing, caring, wonderful team who helped me bring the book to life and who helped me live the message. We lived the message of the book as we worked on it, which was the most rewarding part as well.
It's such a cool legacy and such a cool adventure that you've been on with that. It's must be so fulfilling in so many ways to see it in print and on the shelf. So that's awesome.
It's very fun. Thank you. And it's neat to see, people who I have no idea who they are get value from the book and engage with it. That's really, really fun.
Well, I hope we get a bunch of book sales from this podcast too with our listeners who will
I
hopefully pick it
accept.
up.
I accept. Yeah, that would be great.
You talked earlier about, being humble, and I sometimes equate that to being vulnerable as well. And a lot of times, we all go through things that are tough moments, whether it be career, personal, professional timeframes. And I know a lot of our guests, sometimes here, and they're in that, early stage of emerging careers and feeling sometimes afraid to fail, but also not sure how to face a challenge and how to think through it. But thinking about that, has there been a challenge that, you've seen or that you had to speak up and stand up maybe for yourself and how you handled that situation?
Totally. And yeah, I mean, the funny thing about humility is once you think you are being humble, you're not. It's like a slippery fish. So it's
Yeah,
like, I'm going to be humble now. Like as soon as you say it, you're not. So,
right.
so there's one distinct memory, early on in my career, I was probably, gosh, it would have been 2000, maybe 11 or 12. Um, and I had an opportunity. I was invited to a meeting that I had no business being at because I was junior and it was a very senior high level meeting, but it was one of these like meetings of the mind where certain people from different parts of the world were coming together at a moment, and the likelihood that it would happen ever again in this way and like this sort of origin and like launching pad. The CEO of the company I was working for said, "Okay, I'm inviting you to this meeting not because you deserve it yet or you've earned it, but just because it's not going to happen maybe ever again, and I want you to be a fly on the wall." And my boss, she said to me, like, "Don't speak." And I'm like, okay, which isn't easy for me, as you can tell, and what you know of me, Brian. And so I went to this meeting, and it was going well until the most senior person arrived, and they arrived a little late. And we sort of had this work day together, and the most senior person sort of facilitated and asked a question for all the other participants of this meeting to answer. And for some reason, they asked me first, probably because the stakes of my answer were so low compared to the other folks in that room. And I had a choice. Had I relived that moment, this is what I would have done. I would have said, "Thank you for asking me, and thank you for including me. I'm not going to answer because I don't think this meeting is about me. I really just want to listen and soak this in. I'm far more junior. I'm just getting started. I'm really here to learn." So I kind of would have copped out of the answer. And that may not have been tolerated, but it would have set, because what ended up happening is I spoke out of the side of my mouth. I was arrogant. I was insecure. The funny thing about arrogance is it's insecurity derailing. It's just loud. And so I showed up like a complete asshat for the rest of the day. Like I was just not me. I was not comfortable. And when I wasn't like, as opposed to being uncomfortable and being meek, I was uncomfortable, but like loud. It was not a good look, right? Not a great meeting. Would have done things differently. I was staying at my best friend's apartment because it was the meeting was in New York City. And I didn't have a chance to debrief the meeting with anyone other than me. And I wrote down in my journal like how I would have showed up differently and like what I could own. And then the next day was day 2 of the meeting. That most senior person was no longer there. They weren't part of the second day. It was more of a workshop action day. And I walked back into the same office we were meeting in. And I walked in and I could just sense, like, ever walk into a room and you're like, you were all just talking about me, weren't you? Like, I just had that sense. And they were. I later confirmed that they were. And we went on and I had a one-on-one meeting with my boss. And she was about to open up her mouth and be like, "What the? I told you to be a fly in the wall. Like, what were you doing?" And I said, like, ugh. Like, before you go any further, can I just speak up and just own how I showed up yesterday? And I went on what felt like, Brian, like a 20 or 25-minute monologue of like, and I displayed self-awareness and I took ownership and I think I displayed some humility. And after my what felt like 20-25-minute monologue, she's like, well, sheesh, if you knew all that, why did you show up like such an idiot yesterday? And I'm like, I don't know. But it was a moment that I think either saved my job or definitely, I don't think she was going to fire me, but I think she was going to say like, that's a strike,
Yeah.
don't do that again. And there are so many people who would want to be in this position that you're in, make the most of it. But that was a moment where I followed my instinct and I'm like, before you give me the feedback that you're about to give me, can I tell on myself? And can I give me the feedback that I would give myself? And it went as well as possible. And I ended up having a really great experience at that company.
Yeah, it's a great lesson on reflection and how to handle those situations and some great insights. Thanks for sharing that. When you think
Yeah, thank you.
about
Just own
the,
it.
yeah, own it, right? And when you think about, I love this topic around psychological safety because it's something the last couple of years I've been looking at pretty closely with the young people I've been working with, whether, at a corporation or when I was at the University of Toronto. But it's a thing now that people are talking more about. What is your thoughts around psychological safety from both sides? So from like a leader's perspective, what can they do to help try to create that?
Mm,
And then maybe from, someone like your younger self in that situation where, how do they
mm.
maybe learn to, you know, handle rejection, but also be able to speak up in the workplace where needed? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, when I first started writing the book, I fully admit, Brian, that I thought I was rebranding psychological safety. But there's actually more to it.
Hmm.
So I first learned about psychological safety reading Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. There's like a little note that he references Amy Edmondson's work. And I sort of describe Amy Edmondson as like one of the founding mothers of psychological safety, though the term has been around for many, many decades.
Yeah.
I think as far back as like the 1950s. Um, Edmondson inherited the term. She wrote a paper in the early, I think, 1990s, earlier on in her scholarly career. And one of the reviewers of those papers said, "Oh, you're referring to psychological safety." To which she went, "All right, if it gets me published, let's just go with that." And Edmondson herself admits that it's not the best term. It doesn't really describe what it is. It's a mouthful. It's not sexy.
Yeah.
And to me, psychological safety puts a academic lab coat on a very real human emotion.
Hmm.
And so I lead into good old Zig Ziglar, people don't buy drills, they buy holes. Well, if the drill is psychological safety, the whole of what you get and what people want is a speak up culture. But as I delved into my own experience, interviews, research on the topic, I realized that there's a 2x2 matrix going on. The two questions we ask ourselves before speaking up is, yes, is it psychologically safe to take interpersonal risk here? Absolutely. And is it worth it? Because we've all had an experience where it's safe to speak up, but nothing changes. And if we keep going back to that dry well, eventually apathy is going to set in and we're like, I give up. I'm not going to speak up anymore. Even though I feel safe, I'm not going to waste my breath because of bureaucracy, systemic issues, or a change in habit that's simply too hard. I'm done, right? Now, we also know scenarios, and one of them is Ed Pearson, the senior manager at Boeing, who spoke up about the 737 MAX, or Dr. Kimberly McClear, who spoke up about harassment in the US Coast Guard, right?
Yeah.
It was not safe at all. But they felt it was worth it. They were connected to stakes, both for themselves personally and far wider and reaching in the organization and the impact of that organization. It didn't feel safe to speak up, but they displayed the courageous leadership to do so. So ideally, it feels both psychologically safe and that there's a perception of positive impact. So it's those two axes. Is it safe and is it worth it? And leaders make it safe and make it worth it. I harp against the term fearless leader, or, leaders get rid of fear completely. No. Fear is biological. It's important. We should all feel fear and use it as data to figure out how we pursue. And I think leaders make it safe to still show up and pursue and keep going despite feelings of fear. They normalize fear, as opposed to eradicating fear. No, that's not a thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's some really good thoughts around that. And it's funny from the 1950s because I think from the 1950s to now, I don't know how many people really talked about it because I don't know, looking at my parents and that generation, they didn't talk about necessarily feelings or safety or things, right? And I shouldn't laugh. That's sort of the way it was. But now I think we're more open to talking about some of these things a little bit more, which is good for mental and physical health as well. So, um, yeah, it makes
Which
a lot
is
of sense.
which is also important to say what psychological safety or a speak up culture is and isn't,
Right,
because it's not void of accountability.
right,
It's safety and worth it plus accountability.
right.
And that it's not about being nice or being passive. It's about being kind, which means that we have the capability to have the hardest conversations and come out the other end better.
Absolutely. Not taking it personally. Very good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
When your time with Simon, you had lots of different roles and things, but what were some of the most valuable lessons you learned during your time with him?
Yeah, thank you. I think one is again the importance of, it was so important for me always that we lived our message from the inside out. That was number one. It's like if you make wine and your wine is awful, you shouldn't be in the business of making wine. And the product and service that we offer was far more emotional, around a more inspired, safe, and fulfilled world. And so I always felt, and it was so important for me to live that message from the inside out as well. I mean, Simon is a brilliant communicator, and he taught me, talk more by saying less. It's better to what does he say? It's better to give 3/4 of an answer than an answer and a half.
Hmm. Yep, yep, that makes sense. Um, the vision of the world where people wake up inspired and end the day fulfilled by their work is compelling. How do you believe we all can contribute to making this vision a reality?
So the vision of a more inspired, safe, and fulfilled world. I mean, first and foremost, um, you know, I've noticed something that in every single leadership development program that I've ever seen, participated in, experienced, facilitated in, there's always a module, and it's the first one on leading self.
Hmm.
That if we truly wish to live in a more inspired, safe, and fulfilled world, we need as many people as possible figuring out what makes them tick, figuring out their strengths, figuring out what happens when those strengths derail into weakness or limitation, figure out our weaknesses and limitations. It's like we're all an instrument, and we're each a different instrument that's tuned in a different way. What is our instrument, and then how can we best harmonize with others? And then the work of leadership is then helping others find what's their instrument and how can they harmonize with others. I once had a mentor of me say to me, Brian, you could be the next me, which I realized at that moment, you're no longer my mentor, because the goal is not replication. The
No,
goal should be, I'm here to help you figure out what will make you shine, not follow in my shadow. Um,
100%,
yeah.
100%.
So I think we need folks to figure out what makes them thrive, um, do that, and then also what makes the people around them thrive and do that. And if enough of us do that, we'll change these awful stats that we see out of Gallup around workforce engagement, because it's not a pretty look right now. And it's hard. It's hard being a leader formally in an organization right now. And it's hard navigating this thing called career in life. And we need as many people as possible, like yourself, who try to make it as fulfilling and successful to navigate through.
Well, thank you. I'm thinking about the audience and everything we've covered throughout this conversation, which has been incredible. If you were to think about, a lot of these folks as, in high school looking to go to their first post-secondary or their first job, or maybe launching their career, they've graduated and just trying to figure the world out. Is there any thoughts or advice you would give to this audience that might be thinking about some of those pivotal moments in their life and career?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
I think three. Let me see if I can remember them.
Sure.
One is around no rush. The other was around what I already said, next right choice. And then the other is look to people you admire. Okay. So one is there's a book called Startup Nation that examines, I think it's from 2005 or 6, but it studies Israel. And why is Israel this beacon of innovation? And this little sliver of a country is one of the most innovative places in the world. Why? Well, if you look at how, and there's controversy here in terms of their military, which I don't want to comment on, but you look at what happens to young folks in Israel. At the age of 18, they have no choice unless they have some sort of exemption to go to the military. They spend at minimum 3 to 4 years. Then a good chunk of them leave military at that point. So at that point, they're 21, 22. The next thing they do is they travel the world for a year or two because they've just been in the military and they want a break. They don't want to go to school yet, right? And they've been paid to go to the military, so they have some savings, hopefully, to go and do that. But you also think of a 22-year-old in the military has had more responsibility in those 4 years than you and I might have in our entire lives as it relates to keeping people alive, as it relates to budget, right? It's this amazing growing experience. And we know that our brains develop up until the age of about 25, 26. So a huge growing experience. They then travel the world for 1 or 2 years. Then they pick their major that they go and study, if indeed they are university college bound, at the age of like 24 or 25. Imagine what would be different, Brian, if you picked your major at 24, 25 with all that life experience as opposed to freaking 17 or 18.
Yeah. Big
right?
difference. Yeah.
Big difference. And like I was in such a rush to graduate and get a job. What the freak did I know? So to whatever degree you can, I don't want to assume what your situation is. In some situations, you don't have the luxury of time, but to whatever degree of luxury you have not to rush, I encourage you not to rush.
Yeah.
Take time to learn more about yourself before you make any decision that you can't take back. So that's one.
Yeah.
The next is just make the next best right decision. And know that whatever decision you make, you can always make your next best right decision, which means that if you said yes to a job and 3 months in or 3 years in, you're like, this is not for me, you can make the next best right decision. The last piece of advice is look up and look side to side and even look down, but find other human beings that you admire, that there's a sliver of their pie that you're like, ooh, I want me some of that. I really appreciate how they do this. I really appreciate how they show up doing that. Ooh, this job that they have looks really interesting. If you're 13 years old and you're like, I want to be a veterinarian, but yet you never spend time with a veterinarian, I encourage you to spend some time with at least 2 to 3 veterinarians. Like get a sense of what their life is like. My sister, for as young as she could remember, she wanted to be a physician. She wanted to be a doctor. And I remember going for a drive with her. I think I was driving her to her boyfriend's or something and dropping her off. And she was about to start her career. And she's like, I'm terrified. She's like, I've just poured, all 4 or 5 years of high school, because there was OAC back then in Ontario, all these years of university. Like I've poured everything I could into this one career path, and I have no idea what it's going to be like. What if I've made the wrong choice? Because the way you practice medicine or being a vet or being a construction worker, or the list goes on, there's no one way. So shadow some people and see if you want a good chunk of their life. So I'm a really big believer of, literally, as much as you can, try to walk in the footsteps of the folks that you make up you want to be like them. And it's not enough to just watch a episode of Succession or an episode of insert show here where you watch a lawyer or business person and you're like, I want to be that from Suits. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. Like, go experience their mundane day to day for as much as you can and see if you want that. So those are a few ideas there.
Those are awesome. Really great takeaways from this conversation. I know we're getting close to the end. We could go on here. It's so insightful with the things you're sharing. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share on the podcast with the audience, or anything comes to mind that I didn't ask?
Thank you. I don't think so.
Okay.
I knew some advice I wanted to impart coming in. I think just the last thing I'll say is, on average, a North American works about 90,000 hours in their lives. We often spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our family, and certainly our friends. And as you age and become older, you very much realize that, which is why I just try to do as much business as I can with my friends so we can hang out. But you work for so much of your life. I think we might as well find what makes us tick, find our strengths, find something more important than us than money that we can contribute to with others who we care about and they care about us. Try to make those 90,000 hours as meaningful, as engaging, as fulfilling as they can be. And not every moment needs to be inspiring. Trust, being with a trusting team, I think, is the most important thing. So use the time that you have well and treat it as precious as it is.
Absolutely. And well, huge thank you for joining me today on the podcast. I can think of a better guest to kick off 2024 with. So this will be one of the things we talk about right away as we hit the new year and everybody with their energy coming back from the holidays. But I again, seriously, like, really thank you so much for being a part of this and shedding your insights into a lot of things that were super helpful, not just for me, but in the audience, but for everyone that comes in contact with you. I think you have so much to offer and so much to say and make people think. So thank you for the gift of being you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Brian. A pleasure to shed a little bit of light, and I hope the conversation helps for your listeners. A joy to be with you.
Awesome. Well, for the listeners, if you liked what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network on Spotify. Give us a rating. Follow us on Instagram, Coffee with Convery. This has been Coffee with Convery, and until next time, please stay well.